put on their seatbelts because Tom Horn's in the building. I tell you what, this guy's going to wake you up this morning and give you a lot of great information. I first met Tom back at Southeastern University when Chuck Missler and he were appearing as guest lecturers, and I was enthralled by his presentation. I got to speak to him on the platform for a few moments. He probably doesn't even remember me because there were so many people speaking to him that day, but he's one of the most brilliant minds in alternative news today. He has a website called RaidersNewsUpdate.com. That's RaidersNewsUpdate.com. I subscribe to that as a free subscription, and I've also, I think, bought every book he's ever written, and so I'm a big fan of Tom Horn. So I want everybody to basically sign up at RaidersNewsUpdate.com and start getting his updated news and his information, because this man is off the charts. In fact, Chuck Missler told me he's one of the most brilliant people he's ever met, and he's up to standards as far as all of the alternative news, especially when it starts dealing with the Roman Catholic Church and other things that are basically happening in our environment and in our cosmos today. Tom Horn, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Well, Ted, it's great to be with you. And by the way, I do remember you. In fact, I think we were talking about a book that you were writing on health or genetically modified foods or something like that, right?
We were talking about doing radio talk shows, and ironically, here I am with you as my guest this morning, and so I feel blessed. Folks, I want you guys to phone and call Tom up with questions this morning. We're going to let him go for a few minutes. Tom, tell me about your latest book, and what are we covering this morning? And this floor is basically going to be yours because I know you're up to date and you want to talk about what you want to talk about.
Well, actually, we're not going to talk about the latest book, which is Redeemed Unredeemable, which actually took me behind the iron bars of America's maximum security prisons, where I spoke with people like Tex Watson, the main hitman for the Manson family murders, and David Berkowitz, the famous son of Sam killer. And people can get that book, of course, Redeemed Unredeemable. And, of course, the book deals with a lot of stuff like, you know, one of the questions to Berkowitz was there, in fact, a satanic element during those murders? Were they being committed because you were trying to energize yourself satanically? And he actually admits some things that have never been admitted before about the people that were involved with him. So if people have watched the television series last year, True Detective, he admits that what you might have saw in that series was very much real during his murder spree there throughout New York. But anyway, that's the new book. But actually what Joyce had invited me on to talk with you about today has to do with the coming human enhancement era, transhumanism, the hybrid age, and she wanted me to talk about that, which does have to do with another of my books, and that is Forbidden Gates.
I've read that one. That was excellent.
Yeah, and you know, that funny thing about that book, I wrote that book, came out a couple of years ago, and it never got promoted because the very day that I was to start doing the media tour on that book was when my house burned down. And
wow.
It took us a whole year to kind of get recouped and try to rebuild. The Lord has blessed us, though. We're doing fabulous today. We're getting ready to launch Skywatch Television in January, so things are bigger and better than ever. In fact, I'd love to have you on our program some point in the future. I'd also love to publish one of your books, but I guess that's another conversation for another time. But, okay, transhumanism. This is something that much of the world is really unfamiliar with, even though the term's kind of been out there now for the last decade, and you might go to Google and type it in and see lots and lots of articles, some from science, websites and geek websites, and some just from conspiracy websites. But most people don't realize how serious this is and how their tax dollars are literally flowing into the war chest right now of a growing body of individuals.
Tom, stay right there. You got my full hour this time. This first hour. We got a break coming right up, and when we come back, I will be taking questions for Tom Horn. So you guys, I'm going to talk to him about a lot of really interesting stuff this morning. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And, Tom, before we get started on the transhumanism, I want to ask you a question real quick that I think most people in this audience are completely unaware of. And I know that you know this because I've read in your books several times, and I want to just kind of go over with the folks that are listening, because this is one of the things in your book that shocked me so hard when I read it, and I verified it, I looked it up, and you never hear about this even in the alternative news. Tell me about the ceremony that all U.S. presidents go through before they're basically put into office, basically asking these interdimensional entities to come into them. I want you to go ahead and go into detail on that and just explain it in the only way that you can, because you know a lot more about it than I do.
Well, of course. I mean, this, what had happened was a few years ago, I started looking into some of what was going on in the government. Why did we invade Iraq, Iran, all this stuff, right? And I wanted to know why we were over there. The answers that were being given by the government didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Anyway, bottom line, because we only have an hour, ultimately it led to me taking a trip. I set this up for a U.S. congressman. And I made a trip to Washington, D.C., where I went to the House of the Temple, the Herodome, which is...
Now, hang on a second, Tom. Everybody, I want you to listen to this, okay? This is going to flip you out. This flipped me out, okay? But I want everybody to listen to Tom right now. This is super important. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, the Herodome, the House of the Temple, that's the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, 33rd degree, in Washington, D.C. And I was given exclusive access. In other words, I wasn't on a public tour. And I took my wife with me, thankfully, so that she would be able to verify everything that we discovered there on that day. They gave me two 33-degree Freemasons who took me through the entire building, all three levels of that building, showed me all kinds of extraordinary things, so much that we won't be able to go into today. But if people want to know all of the details of that, I published a book called Zenith 2016, because I believe something may have started in the year 2012 that's going to reach its zenith in 2016 and pass that to the year 2019. But people can read all about that. That day, at the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, I asked them several questions that had been posed to me by a guy who was a 32nd degree Freemason, and he said, here's the questions that you ought to be asking if you really want to understand what's going on there in Washington. And so one of the questions I asked was, I had heard that at the inauguration of every United States president, that an ancient ritual that actually came out of ancient Egyptian theology is performed. It's called the raising of Osiris. And this is very connected to the obelisk there in Washington, D.C., and how it faces the dome, which is architecture designed after the ancient Egyptian architecture, in which their magicians performed a ritual in which they would raise the spirit of Osiris from the underworld so that that spirit, that demon, could take its place incarnated within every pharaoh so that Egypt would have divine representation. So what I wanted to know was that same ritual still being conducted today right there inside the Herodome? That's what I had heard, that 33-degree Masons at the inauguration of every U.S. president conduct a raising of Osiris ceremony so that the spirit of Osiris takes its place resident in every United States president so that we have divine representation according to their mythos here in the United States. And when I asked that question, here's what's interesting is right up until that moment, every question I asked these two guys, they were very willing to answer. They were very responsive. You would almost say they were Christ-like in their approach. And when I asked that question, one guy got visibly nervous. The other guy got up and walked out of the room, and my wife gave me a look that said, zip it, buddy, because at that moment, I mean, there was just this creepy, ominous feeling. We're sitting there under a stylized magic square that's inside their holy room where they conduct this ritual. There's a giant throne there that the leader of the 33rd degree would sit upon while all of the others are assembled, and they conduct this magic ritual. Well, he would not answer the question. A few minutes later, the other 33-degree Mason came back, and he gave me 2 coins. And I looked at them. They're very weird. They're very Egyptian-looking coins, right? They burn up in my house. But he gave me these 2 coins, and he said, if you're ever asked for these, make sure you present them. And then he walks out of the room, and I look at the other guy, and by this time everything's getting very weird and spooky. So anyway, bottom line, after I left there that day, I came out of there understanding that unrecognized by the vast majority of people around the world is the greatest conspiracy of all time sitting right out there in the open in Washington, D.C., also at the Vatican, by the way, is this ancient magical talisman. It's a primeval concept that was designed in antiquity for the express purpose of regeneration, resurrection, apotheosis, for deity incarnation from the underworld to Earth's surface through the union of those respective figures. The dome, which is the ancient structural representation of the womb of Isis, and the obelisk, the Washington obelisk, which is the ancient representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris, and this goes back into Egyptian antiquity. So I come home, by the way, and I contact a 32nd degree Freemason that was a friend of mine, and I asked him about those coins, and he got really quiet. And finally he said, Tom, he said, that goes back to very, very old Freemasonic belief. He said, essentially, he said, I don't want to scare you, but essentially what it means is if you're ever approached by somebody that's asking you about any of this, you give them the 2 coins, and it's like a pass. And if you don't give them the 2 coins, you might not walk away from there. This is really old school, deep occultic. Well, anyway, they burned up in the house, and since that time I've done radio with U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen, and I've asked them about the dome and the obelisk, and every single one of them have admitted that what I documented in Zenith 2016 is indeed a fact. Now,
let me ask you a question on this, Tom, because, I mean, I know everybody's got their jaws hanging loose right now. They cannot believe what you just said. I believe you because I've read your stuff, and I've also read Zenith 2016. I think I've read all your books. They're all phenomenal. And the thing I like about it is your writing style, because they're so easy to read. But are the presidents or the people that are being put into the White House, are they present during this ceremony, or is this done from a remote location to that person, regardless of whether they're aware of it or not?
Well, it probably might be both. I think there have been U.S. presidents, maybe the majority of U.S. presidents, that would not go along with that occultic idea, that they would see it maybe as a bunch of hooey. I think of people like Ronald Reagan, people like that. And people could draw their own conclusions. On the other hand, Obama was the only U.S. president that ever had a ball thrown in his favor by the 33rd degree Freemasons. So there definitely is a connection with some of the people that have served in the White House. And look, people need to know this. Many of the founding fathers were dedicated to setting aside this continent, this new continent, to an Atlantean scheme. It was a vision. It was based on the works of Sir Francis Bacon. He was an English philosopher and author who wrote a Rosicrucian novel called The New Atlantis. And it portrayed a very specific utopian vision, but it was one that the European secret societies, though they were obsessed with it, circumstances in Europe at that time would not allow them to bring it to power, and so they set their eyes on America as the new world, where Bacon's strategy could be unimpeded by their political realities. And so if you study early American history, you find out that as many as 44 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons who were guided by the New Atlantean vision. Study all of the early founders of the United States right up until some of the greatest experts in Freemasonry began writing a little bit of information that was supposed to be kept private. It was later published. People like Manly P. Hall, who was considered Freemasonry's greatest philosopher. He was a 33rd degree Freemason. And he talks about how Bacon had garnered this impressive following of wealthy Europeans who came to the United States, dedicated to the task of building this new Atlantean scheme here in America. Well, then, when you study and you understand this early influence, then you go to Washington, D.C., it'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck.
Now, I'll only ask you another question. Is it true? Now, I know the answer to this, but I'm setting it up as a question for you, that Washington, D.C. was laid out in a pentagram with an open leg.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Now explain to everybody what that means.
Well, I can't. Yeah.
You know. I've read this in your books. I know what it means.
Look, all of Washington D.C. was dedicated as kind of a machine, a generator. Some people have called it a mirror Vatican because of its striking similarity to the layout of the facilities there in Rome. And when you compare the parallelism between Washington and the Vatican, you'll find the most striking similarity is the Capitol building and the dome that faces the obelisk. And in Washington, D.C., it sits connected to a pentagram. I think it was, I'm trying to think of the guy's name right now that referred to it as a generator.
I know, Tom. I'm sorry to put you on this one, but that's a tough one. I know it is.
Yeah.
If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. There's a lot of other stuff we can cover.
Well, there's a lot of stuff we can cover, and I'm trying to decide right now if this is what we want to do the show on, then I'll launch. But sometimes it takes me a little bit of time because this goes into the Great Seal of the United States of America. It goes into why Thomas Jefferson and others wanted the layout of Washington, D.C. shepherded according to an ancient occultic scheme. It's literally an alchemical blueprint, if that makes any sense. That holds a lot.
Let's go. We're about to come up to a break, but I want to go ahead and go into detail on this with you because this is some of the stuff that I've read, and I apologize. I tried to call you last night. I got a recorder. I want to talk to you a little bit about this before you came on today because this is something that I feel that was so interesting to me that I want the folks to realize what this pentagram was all about in Washington, because we read about it all the time, what the open leg was all about, why it was laid out the way it was, and then we'll go into the transhumanism. My guest today is the one and only brilliant Thomas Horn. He's got some interesting articles, and he's been featured by other writers in the LA Times, the MSNBC, Christianity Today, WorldNet Daily, Newsmax, the White House Correspondents, and dozens of newspapers and magazines all around the world. He is one of the most brilliant people I've ever read, one of the easiest sets of books that I've ever read, and basically is just an expert in this field that we're talking about today. We're also going to be talking about transhumanism in a few minutes. I've kind of put Tom on the spot right now. Go to his website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and basically sign up for his newsletter, get his books. I recommend all of his books. I've read pretty much all of his books, except for the latest one he's come out with, and just realize this man is the gift of God. He's anointed. He's telling you guys the truth today, and he's going into detail. I've held off on the phone calls because I know once we start taking phone calls for Tom, he's going to be besieged, and I wanted to get his information out. And, Tom, go ahead and let's do a brief synopsis on what Jefferson wanted to do in this pentagram if we can, and then when we get to the bottom of the hour, we're going to go to break, and I want to come back. And if we can, I want to start on the transhumanism because I know the audience listeners are going to find this fascinating. Okay, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do because you and I really should do a whole series. We should do 6 or 8 hours on the subject of the Washington, D.C. Layout, the pentagram that's laid out in the streets with one open end. You just tell everybody what that one open is. That will bring Lucifer in and the trap him. Yeah. So here's the thing, and people out there that have studied the occult will understand this, that you have a pentagram's a 5-sided star, but 5, if you go back into Pythagoras, this, brilliant mathematician of ancient times, but he was also a mysticist. And he talks about the powers of numbers, but the number 5 was most significant to him in the pentagram. In fact, he called it the penta-alpha. So it is essentially the beginning of all mystical values. And every serious researcher out there right now that will study the pentagram and then go to Google and type in the aerial photos that clearly reveal how in Washington, D.C., there is a 5-pointed pentagram with an open end. And then I might even recommend that you watch, my friend Chris Pinto has a film called Riddles in Stone, and I would recommend that you read that. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Ted, because there's so much information here. We just released this book, Redeemed Unredeemable. Anybody that goes to survivormall.com and orders that book, I'm going to tell Survivor Mall to give them Zenith 2016 so that they can read all of this information. But anyway, with the pentagram, why is it incomplete? When you look at it in the streets of Washington, D.C., and it is explained in our book, explained in the movie Riddles in Stone, because of something Manly P. Hall, who was an expert in Freemasonic belief, wrote, where he said that the pentagram is used extensively in black magic. But when it's used in that way, it can be used in 3 different ways. He talks about the star and how it can be broken at one point by not permitting the
final converging lines to touch, and that when it's used that way in black magic, it's called a sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil. And what it does is that it allows, in Masonic belief, it allows for the influence of the devil to have power over that area, to have power over that dominion. And if people think that Manly P. Hall was making that up, you can study all of the Master Masons, Jonathan Wolfgang von Goethe, all of them who talked about using the pentagram in that way. In fact, Wolfgang used it in his play Faust, which most people are very familiar with. Faust, Mephistopheles making a deal with the devil. And read about in Faust how as the devil tries to leave, he's hindered as a result. He and Faust have this conversation in which he opens one side of the pentagram to allow for the devil to be able to enter into that broken pentagram. So when you understand that, and you understand that that's deeply part of Freemasonic occultism, then it makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck when you look at Washington, D.C., see the dome, the obelisk, and then this open-ended pentagram, this broken pentagram that is allowed for summoning the devil to bring in horrific black magic power.
Okay, Tom, we're coming back from the break in just a few minutes. We're going into more detail on this. Our phone lines are lit up. You guys go ahead and call. Questions for Tom? Let's go ahead and take a couple real quick phone calls, Tom. We have lit up the board this morning. I mean, gosh, everybody wants to talk to you. I knew as soon as you started on that open pentagram and Mephistopheles and all of that stuff and opening up the pentagram for Lucifer to come into Washington. So the power of Lucifer would be trapped in there, I guess, as far as what you said in your book, if I'm reading that correctly. We need to talk about that some more into detail. We got to take these phone calls real quick because I got a full board of calls. And then I want Tom to start talking about transhumanism a little bit. Gloria in New York, go ahead. Question for Tom.
Yes, thank you. Tom Horn, I appreciate you. And I'm a Christian. I've been a targeted individual for about 6 years. Lately, I've been seeing people with very dark slits, vertical slits, very blue eyes, whatever. And I've been seeing that a lot for the past few years. And they seem to notice me. I don't know. I just get so nervous. I'm nervous right now. I wondered what do you have? I've been seeing people that are not really, to me, are not human. Anyway, that's what I want to know. What do you know about this? I know that they're around us, and what is their purpose? I'm even scared talking to you, but God bless you. Thank you. I'll listen on the air.
Thanks, Gloria. She's been seeing folks with vertical slits in their eyes, apparently, Tom. What do you think of that?
Well, it's entirely possible. I wouldn't relegate what she is saying to improbability, and I wouldn't take, a quick raise of the eyebrows about what she is saying, because and we're not going to have time today, I don't think, to talk about transhumanism, but if we had, ultimately one of the questions that comes up is, are there non-human humans around us right now? I mean, people that are watching the news, if you see what's in the news, what the popular news is reporting, then you have to realize that it's probably 20 years behind what is actually happening in government-funded laboratories. You would know that based on many of the books that you've written, Ted, on genetically modified foods and what is affecting our health today. Why is there the upsurge in so many diseases around the world today? So this has been going on for a long time. Well, are there human non-humans? This is something that we want to relegate to, Star Trek, to sci-fi, to whatever. But the truth is, when you read right now in Great Britain how they are authorizing the creation of germline genetically altered embryos to be born to 3 parents, there are obviously humans that are, some of this, by the way, began almost 20 years ago. There are 16 and 18-year-olds today that are the offspring of 3-parent families. So this isn't anything brand new. It's just...
Okay, let me ask one quick question, just yes or no, and go back to your topic. Are we currently cloning humans with additional DNA added to them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we are. We are.
Okay.
Yeah, germline genetic engineering. We can talk about that, but you wanted to talk about Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm sorry. No, all the books that I've read, okay, when you hit that pentagram thing in Washington with an open leg and you start going to Mesophiles, you start talking about all of that, I just thought, whoa, okay, this explains a lot. This goes back, because yesterday we had Ann Barnhart on, and she was talking about the satanic influence on our government. And, and I don't think she even realizes what she was saying as far as how deep it really is. I mean, it goes all the way back to Bohemian Grove and all these crazy things they're doing.
How deep it really is and what we're heading for in the year 2016. Listen, and people who are listening right now and thinking, okay, Tom Horn is another conspiracy terrorist. This really doesn't have anything to do with the founding of the country. It has nothing to do with where we're going in our future. Our own government records, you can go and Google this, clearly state that our U.S. capital city was shepherded to intentionally be dedicated to pagan gods.
That's right.
Go article, the most approved plan, the competition for the Capitol's design, and follow it to our own library of site. And it talks about how there was a competition for the design of Government Center in Washington, D.C., but how that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the commissioners of the District of Columbia rejected all of the entries and a design, it says this on our own government website, a design based on the old Roman Pantheon with the circular dome rotunda dedicated to all pagan gods, was suggested by Jefferson, who shepherded it through all of its different transformations. So this is an absolute historical fact. What the Freemasons wanted, the design of this country, the open end on the pentagram, this was all based on absolute design, based on antiquity, and the idea that our country was a different kind of country, that it was going to be the leader eventually of the new world order, and that eventually all of the nations of the earth would become, what? Subservient to whoever the king of this nation would become.
Now, let me ask you a quick question, Tom, because I know a lot of folks that I get this question all the time when I start talking about this stuff, and I basically have a common answer for it. I want to hear what your answer is for it. A lot of people in the Masonic lodges are completely unaware of this. And a lot of folks in the lower level Masonic lodge, I should say, with the first degree Masons, when they first get involved in all this. Tell me about these guys. Do you think that they're aware of all of this, or do you think this is just for the higher level? Because I know folks that claim to be Christians that are Masons. Are those two mutually exclusive if they really know the truth?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I was a pastor, I had members of my board that were Freemasons. They were 32nd degree or lower. They were just part of a fraternity. These are guys that get together and raise money for charitable causes. In fact, when I wound up going to Washington, D.C., which is very much a central thread in that book, Zenith 2016, that I'm going to give people, and you mentioned a moment ago they need to go to Raiders News Update. They can go there, but they need to follow the link to the store, which is survivormall.com. And it's there, if they purchase the book Redeemed Unredeemable, type into the comment section on checkout, I heard you talking with Ted on radio or something like that. And I'm going to make sure that we give them Zenith 2016 and some other books that are very much committed to the conversation we're having today, because since we are talking about it and I wasn't ready to talk about it, I want to make sure they get all of the most well thought out information. So Freemasons, for the most part, 32nd degree and lower, they're not part of an occult organization, at least not knowingly so, but their dues and their money and their investments dedicated to the 33rd degree and beyond certainly are. When I was at the House of the Temple, I went up, there's a dedicatory on the second level of the House of the Temple where there is a hall there, and you walk into it. And it lists all the names of people that have given millions of dollars and more for the cause of spreading the Freemasonic gospel. And you'll see names there like George W. Bush, the Bush family. So you'll see some very famous names there of people who have very much heavily committed to what is above the 33rd degree. Also,
now, Tom, when they're talking about the light bearer, and when they're talking about Masonic rituals, who are they referring to?
They're referring to Lucifer, and that according to their own scholars. And people need to know that it's not just modern presidents, I mentioned the Bushes just now, and Obama's ball that was held in his favor by the Freemasons. But when you look at the U.S. dollar bill and you see the symbolism that is on the reverse side of the U.S. dollar bill, the uncapped pyramid with the all-seeing eye, which is a Masonic symbol, hovering above the top of it, this also goes back to Freemasons. Henry Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture for the United States in the 1930s, between him and Roosevelt, they're the ones that put that symbolism on the U.S. dollar bill. These were both men who were dedicated to Freemasonry. Wallace himself is a very interesting individual, and I actually go into quite a bit of the history behind Henry Wallace in the book Zenith 2016, because he was actually a disciple of Agni Yogi Society founder and Theosophist Nicholas Roerich, who is very famous today in mystical circles. And this was a guy that was focused on apocalyptic themes surrounding the coming of the new earthly order, the new world order.
Okay.
And he was able to convince Wallace and also the wife of the president, Roosevelt's wife, that the United States had been set aside for a particular purpose, and that was to bring about the leader of the end times New World Order, the fulfillment of the Kume Sibyl's prophecy, the return of Apollo.
Hang on 1 second, Tom. Okay, now I hope everybody's listening to this. The United States was set aside for the end times to bring in a new world order according to the Masons. Now also, Tom, let me ask you another question, and I referred to this before, and I want to make sure that this is accurate information. Morals and Dogma that was written by Albert Pike. Does he lay out the 3 world wars in that book, or is that a letter that was written in addition to that book?
Well, now there's a lot of controversy surrounding that. Albert Pike was, of course, one of the leaders in Freemasonry. He was an intelligent man. He was also an absolute apostate pagan who would go out in the middle of the forest and sit on a big throne during orgies. I mean, there's a lot of terrible stuff about his history as well. But as far as the 3 world wars, I don't include that in my works because there's too much controversy surrounding whether it's legitimate or not.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to some phone calls. We got a full board, Tom. Francis, North Carolina, go ahead.
Morning, folks. It's a question statement I have for the guest. Just as the star NDC that is reversed, which is obviously negative, I'm glad that you're aware of the fact that the upright star is just the opposite.
Thanks, Francis. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, some people say that is true. Again, I'm very careful to get involved with symbolisms that could be occultic in any situation. And again, my research led me from people like David Ovison, who is a highly respected Freemason, who is the sovereign grand commander of the 33rd degree Supreme Council of Freemasons in Washington, D.C., has endorsed his works. And so what I try to do is I try to go to basically the people in power in Washington, the voice behind the voice, those who are actually operating behind the president's throne, and find out what is it that they truly believe. Well, they're highly secretive, and that's why I had to go through a U.S. congressman. I had to meet with 33rd degree Freemasons, and they were willing to answer a lot of my questions, and then they were not willing to answer some of my questions. People that read the book Zenith 2016 will see pictures of me inside the Hera Dome, standing there at the hall that I was talking about a moment ago. And what I do is just stick to what I can know.
Okay, now I want you to repeat this real quick, just in one sentence. We've got so many phone calls for you, Tom. You said that there's an invocation ceremony for every U.S. president, whether they're president or not, asking the spirit of Osiris to come and go into the president.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, I want to do a one-liner on that. Now, guys, if you're listening to me this morning and you're listening to Tom, that's just messed up, okay? That goes all the way back to Egypt and mysticism and Satanism and the occult and everything else. And Tom is 100% right about this. I believe him completely because I know he's done the research on it. So if you're wondering why the government is so messed up, this morning you're getting an eye-opener. Okay, let's go to Abby in West Virginia. Go ahead, Abby. You got a question for Tom. We're running out of time. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. What is the symbolic meaning 911 on the side of the pentagon being pierced?
Tom, do you have I kind of know what the side was they pierced. The side of the, thank you so much for calling, Abby. The side they pierced where they went into the Pentagon was basically where the budgetary offices were that had discovered $2.3 trillion in funds they could not trace that had been announced the day before. And all of the research and the researchers that had been doing that research and apparently the records were destroyed that day by whatever hit the Pentagon. Is there any other symbolic meaning to that, Tom, that you know of?
Well, there might be. I think you've done a better job than I could answering that question with the time that we have.
Okay. Also, some people are also saying because of the twin obelisks of the Square Trade Towers, there was some satanic meaning to the entire 9/11 as a giant sacrificial thing. But I don't think we have any time to even get into that today at all. Annette from West Virginia, go ahead.
Gentlemen, I believe with your background that you accept that everything in Satan's kingdom is trying to counterfeit everything in God's kingdom. Now, I know from historical research that Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh, were in Egypt, and the two obelisks...
Hey, hang on one second. Annette, thanks for calling. Tom, we're almost out of time. Go ahead. What do you think about her comment about Satan trying to counterfeit everything that God has done?
Well, absolutely. And... The Antichrist, is right around the corner. And what theology tells us about him is he will be the antithesis of everything that Jesus was. In the same way that Jesus was born of God, the Antichrist will be born of Satan. Jesus performed miracles, the Antichrist will perform anti-miracles. Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. The Bible tells us about Antichrist that he will receive a deadly head wound, and then he will recover from that, and all of the world will marvel. So undoubtedly, the Antichrist and the coming kingdom of the beast are going to represent antithetical, parallel, mirror, false versions of the things that Jesus did and who he was and who he represents.
Wow, well said, Tom. Well said. Okay, we got just a couple of minutes. We're going to try to do two more phone calls. I want to leave the final segment completely for Tom. Go ahead, Dave in New York. Go ahead. You're on with Tom Horn.
Good morning. Hey, Tom, your new program that's coming out in January, is that going to be available on Rick's satellite? Are you familiar with Rick at all?
I'm not, and you will find out about me that while I finance all of this other stuff, I'm like the most low-tech guy on the face of the planet. But I can tell you that the new website is completely mobile-ready, meaning you'll be able to look at it on your smartphones or iPads or anything else. I'm talking about Skywatch TV. We will have a Roku channel and probably other media box channels, as I understand it. And we will be on cable television, too, but I will tell you right now that it is my opinion that investing in cable television is...
Okay, Tom, we're coming up to a hard break. We've got to take... We come back, final segment with Tom Horn. You guys call him up. Wow, what a fast hour we've had with Tom Horn. I've been very just impressed with all the phone calls we've had. We still have a full board of calls. We're going to try to take them as quickly as possible. And, Tom, I want you to know I'm going to give you a call today after the show and discuss a few things with you also. In addition to that, I want folks to realize that they need to go to Tom's website. I'm going to tell you what that is and the books you need to order. I'm personally endorsing all of Tom's books. They're incredibly well written. They're super easy to read, and they're extremely informative. I've learned so much from his material, and I consider him to be a leader in this field. He and Chuck Missler are both mentors of mine, and I just feel blessed to know both of them. So, Tom, go ahead. Tell them about your website, and we'll try to go back to calls the last few minutes.
Yeah, website is RaidersNewsUpdate.com. In January, somewhere probably around the third week of January, both RaidersNewsUpdate.com, but it will be turning into SkywatchTV.com. And then if the people want to get those free books we were talking about, they need to go to survivormall.com. Get the book Redeemed Unredeemable, which is the brand new book I referred to in the beginning of this broadcast, and I'll make sure that they get Zenith 2016s and some other works that I've done along the subject matter that we've talked about today. One of your callers a moment ago mentioned the number 11, and during the break, I was trying to remind myself of some of the stuff that I wrote about in the number 11.
You wrote a bunch about 11 and 5, that's right.
Oh, my gosh. And then I started thinking about, George W. Bush's New World Order speech, September 11, 2001, Flight 11 crashing into the Twin Towers, Flight 11 hitting the Twin Towers, which form the number 11. Flight 11 had 11 crew members. New York was the 11th state added to the Union. New York City has 11 letters. Afghanistan, the first nation the U.S. attacked following 9/11, 11 letters. George W. Bush, 11 letters. The Pentagon. So that list goes on and on. It's all inside the book, Zenith 2016, which I will give them free. But they will need to remember, when they check out at survivormall.com, type in the comments section, I heard you talking with Ted Brower on the radio, BROER, right? On the radio. Or I heard you on the Joyce Riley show, something like that, and I will make sure that people over there at survivormall.com know to do that. The biggest question I have today, Ted, is when are you going to let me publish a book by you on the effects on our health of genetically modified foods?
It's funny, Tom, you asked me that, because I haven't even talked about this on the show. I have a new book that we just started working on. It'll be ready to go in a couple of months, and then you and I are going to discuss that today, because I'd love to have you do that for me.
Give me a shot at it.
I will. And also, folks realize this. I mean, Tom and I, we're not following a script, for heaven's sake. I haven't spoken to him for a couple of years since he was at the Southeastern University, and it's just that we have a kindred spirit. I believe what he tells us is true, just like you guys hopefully believe that whatever I'm telling you that I believe is true, because I'm not going to sit here and mislead you with anything. Go to his website, go to the Raiders update, hang on a second, RaidersNewsUpdate.com. Forgive me, I'm trying to do things without my glasses on. And because you got to remember, I'm 59 years old. Tom and I just sound young. We've been around for a while. But real quick, we got a couple more phone calls, Tom. Let's try to get these folks been holding for a while. Les in West Virginia, go ahead.
How you doing? You're doing a good job, sir.
Well, thanks, Les. We've got about 2 minutes before we quit.
All right.
We got John Rappaport on. Go ahead and tell me what's your quick question or comment.
There's a book called Deadly Deception. Jim Evans, I think his name is. It's his experience accepting the 33rd degree over in Washington, down from the obelisk.
It's called Deadly Deception. Thanks for the call, Les. Sorry to cut you off. Have you heard of that book, Tom?
I think I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
Okay, all right. So I don't know anything about that book. Let's go to Wes in Idaho. Go ahead, Wes.
The U.S. Supreme Court in 1892, in the case of Holy Trinity versus U.S., said...
I'm so sorry. I'll take your phone call. Stay with me. We'll take your call at the top of the hour. Tom's got to go. We've got about 10 seconds. My thanks to my special guest, Tom Horn, this morning. I appreciate him being on with me. We'll have him back. You guys have just overwhelmed the phone lines.